As one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime in the New York region, the Bonanno crime family has a history longer than my arm, so let's try and keep it concise. This family was seen as the most brutal of the 5 families during the 20th century, so don't go making all buddy-buddy. Their origins can be traced back to the town of Castellammare del Golfo, located in the province of Trapani, Sicily. Their boss, by the way, was Giuseppe Pepe Bonanno, and his older brother and advisor, Stefano. I hope I didn't butcher my Italian. The clan's strongest ally was the leader of the Magaddino clan, Stefano Magaddino, the brother of Joseph's maternal grandmother. During the 1900s, the 2 clans feuded with Felice Buccellato, the boss of the Buccellato clan. So in 1902, Stefano arrived in New York and became a powerful member of the Castellammare clan. After the deaths of Stefano and Giuseppe, their younger brother Salvatore took revenge by killing members of the Buccellatos. So by 1903, Salvatore married Catherine Bonventre, and on January 18th of 1905, she gave birth to Joseph. 3 years later, Salvatore moved his family to New York City and began establishing dominance and control in the Castellammare community of Williamsburg, Brooklyn. So while operating in Brooklyn, the Castellammare leaders were able to secure the criminal organization's future. As of 2017, the family had 110 established members and over 500 associates. They were responsible for numerous planned killings and accidental deaths over the years, to the point where I spent like a half an hour today trying to count them all. I kept getting lost in my count. There was too many. Genghis Khan rose from obscurity in a small corner of the Mongolian steppe to form the largest land empire in history. For the Mongols, the family was the central pillar of society. Genghis' sons and then grandsons extended the empire to reach from the western shores of the Black Sea to the Pacific. So these Mongols, often outnumbered, conquered through their mastery of tactics and psychological warfare. So if a city or an entire people surrendered, they would treat them well. They'd allow them to enjoy the fruits of a secure world. If they resisted, well, you and your city are gonna feel the full fury of the enraged invaders. Despite all the violence that took place as the Mongols extended their rule, once they were in power, the lands were safe, they were well controlled. In many cases, this represented a distinct improvement from previous conditions. Subjects had considerable personal liberty, such as the freedom to follow their own religion, but at what cost? Because this comes with a price. Some experts calculate that 11% of the world's population died because of the Mongol expansion. That's a lot of people. The Ptolemies of ancient Egypt ruled between 305 to 30 BC and are responsible for such a long list of mysterious deaths that they had to be listed today. So they viewed family members as a fight to the death, where you constantly try to eliminate your closest relatives before they did it to you. So let's say P IV killed his mother, who had previously killed her husband because he was having an affair with her mother. So then he married his sister Arsinoe III, who was immediately killed after her husband/brother's death. Her son, P V, had his mother's killers ripped to pieces by an angry group of people. P VII was either killed by his uncle or his father, we're not super sure on that one. P VIII married Cleopatra II, but began an affair with her daughter, Cleopatra III. He had his son cut into pieces and then sent them to his mother. Ugh. So P IX tried to kill his mother, Cleopatra III, then married the first one, and then another sister, both called Cleopatra. P X married the daughter of P IX, Berenice III, and P XI also married Berenice III, who was either his sister or his mother or both. And after 19 days of marriage, he had her killed, and he was promptly torn to pieces by an enraged Greek mob. And that's just the highlights, folks. Time for another one of the New York 5 families, the Genovese crime family. Also referred to as the West Side, they were founded by Charles Lucky Luciano in 1931 until being renamed after boss Vito Genovese in 1957. Originally in control of the waterfront on the west side of Manhattan, as well as the docks and the Fulton Fish Market on the East River waterfront, this family was run for many years by Vincent the Chin Gigante, who feigned insanity by shuffling unshaven through New York's Greenwich Village by wearing a tattered bathrobe and muttering to himself incoherently to avoid persecution. If it works. It works. So this family is the oldest and the largest of the 5 families. Finding new ways to make money in the 21st century, they took advantage of lax due diligence by banks during the housing bubble with a wave of mortgage frauds. They appear to be the most organized and powerful family in the US, with sources believing that Liborio Barney Bellomo is the current boss. Maybe. Unique in today's mafia climate, the family has benefited greatly from members following omerta, which is a code of conduct emphasizing secrecy and non-cooperation with law enforcement and the justice system. So while many mobsters from across the country have testified against their crime families since like the 1980s, this family has only had 11 members and associates turned in history, which is not a lot. Nay. They're known for crimes of, oh boy, let's see, racketeering, killing, labor union infiltration, extortion, illegal gambling, substances, loan sharking, bookmaking, truck hijacking, fraud. I could keep going, but we only have so much time. The Scottish Bean Clan. It might sound like a kind of yummy dish, but this isn't for recipes. We're not cooking here. They were a 45-member clan in Scotland in the 16th century that killed and feasted on over 1,000 people during, just 25 years. According to legend, Bean and his clan members were eventually caught by a search party sent by King James VI and lost their lives for their heinous crimes. Alexander Bean was born in East Lothian during the 16th century, where he eventually met a vicious woman named Black Agnes Douglas, who shared his inclinations, and she was accused of being a witch. So after some robbing and the consumption of just one of their victims, the couple ended up at a coastal cave in Benay Head between Girvan and Ballantrae. I tried. The cave was about 200 yards deep and the entrance was blocked by water during high tide. So this was a great hiding spot for 25 years. They produced 6 daughters, 8 sons, 14 granddaughters, and 18 grandsons. And yeah, the grandchildren were the products of keeping it in the family, if you get what I mean. So this clan thrived by laying very careful ambushes at night to rob and end individuals or small groups, bringing the bodies back to their cave where then, well, dinner time! They pickled the leftovers in barrels and discarded what they didn't need. Sometimes that would wash up on nearby beaches. This strategy was used to help conceal their crimes and lead villagers to believe that it was animals that were attacking these travelers. Look, the body parts and disappearances did not go completely unnoticed by the locals, but the clan stayed in their cave by day, took their victims at night. So they weren't exactly out and about. They were eventually captured alive, and they met their end without trial, because folks were like, yeah, that's subhuman, you don't need a trial, your life is over. Sonny and his fellow men had their fun parts cut off and thrown into the fire. They lost their hands and feet, and then game over. Now the women, tied to stakes, burned alive. Makes sense for the time period. And finally for today, the Bender family. We can't talk about their very fun nickname, but you know what I'm talking about. So this was a family of mass Sacklers. They lived and operated in Labette County in Kansas, US, back in 1871 to 1872. So we've got John, his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and daughter Kate. And we don't know how many people specifically they killed, but if we're estimating, at least a dozen travelers. What do you mean by travelers? Well, they would visit the family's bed and breakfast, and then they'd be hypnotized to stay for dinner, given a seat of honor at the table, which was positioned over a trapdoor into the cellar. So they'd be distracted, and then somebody bops you on the head, you fall through the trapdoor, game over.
Let's dive into the dark and mysterious world of the Borgias, one of Italy's most infamous families during the Renaissance. Rodrigo Borgia rose to power by becoming Pope Alexander VI, now not through piety, but by using bribery, manipulation, and crafty alliances. His children, Cesare and Lucrezia, were equally known for their rumored involvement in all kinds of secretive schemes, including poisoning their political enemies. Yeah, talk about family fun day, let's go poison some people. The Borgias' reign became a symbol of corruption within the Catholic Church, where moral lines were blurred in the pursuit of power. But with every move came new enemies, of course, that's how history and everything works. So imagine a pope using a sacred position for political gain. That never happens, right? That's never happened in the history ever. Number 9, the Yamadas. Travel to feudal Japan, we find the Yamada family, known as fierce samurai warlords during the turbulent Sengoku period. Now this was an era when loyalty and alliances were always shifting, and the Yamadas played it well for a time. They rose to power through strategic alliances and fearless tactics on the battlefield. That was their play, they would just cut everyone up. But with every rise comes resistance, and the Yamadas soon found themselves in a web of betrayal and infighting. Rival clans sought to destroy them, and eventually internal strife tore them apart. Yeah, they were all betrayed, they were gotta watch your back, right? Was it the unforgiving nature of feudal Japan that caused their downfall, or could the Yamada family have maintained their power if they had remained united on the inside? Number 8, the Ptolemies. One of the oldest families on this list, going back to 300 BCE. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's empire fractured, but their reign was filled with more drama than dance moms. I mean, it was really crazy back then. Sibling rivalry took on a whole new meaning, with brothers and sisters plotting against each other for the throne, Game of Thrones style, you know? Cleopatra Cleopatra, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, famously aligned herself with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony in a bid to secure her reign. But family betrayals and internal power struggles weakened the dynasty over time. How much of their downfall was due to strategic missteps, and how much was simply a case of family drama spiraling out of control? Sounds like a family Monopoly night. Everyone's just mad at each other, yelling. That's a McWater's Monopoly night right there. Number 7, the Tudors. The Tudors are one of Britain's most famous dynasties, and for good and bad reasons. Henry VIII's desperation for a male heir led to the of 2 wives, not to mention his monumental decision to break away from the Catholic Church. He was doing things a bit different back then. They have a whole musical about the, you've seen it. His daughter, Mary I, got that, Mary nickname. That was because of her persecution of Protestants, while his other daughter, Elizabeth I, brought about the golden age of England. Very different young ladies there. Did the Tudors' relentless pursuit of power justify their ruthless actions, or were they simply products of their time navigating in these harsh political landscapes? I mean, to be fair, it probably was hard growing up with, that guy as your dad, so can't blame them too much here. Number 6, the Romanovs. For over 300 years, the Romanovs ruled Russia with an iron grip, but their dynasty met a tragic and sudden end during the Russian Revolution. Tsar Nicholas II's reign was marked by poor decision-making, particularly during World War I, which led to widespread unrest and dissatisfaction. The revolutionaries saw the Romanovs as a symbol of the old oppressive regime, and in 1917, the entire family was imprisoned, and then later they were as a group. Their downfall remains one of history's most dramatic moments, and yeah, I can agree with that, absolutely. Let's move on. Number 5, the Habsburgs. The Habsburg family was one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, controlling vast territories that spanned from Austria to Spain, everywhere, you name it. Their strategy for maintaining power included arranged marriages within the family to preserve their bloodline, but this also, of course, led to health issues like the infamous Habsburg jaw. Now, despite their impressive empire, their obsession with power and purity led to frequent wars and revolts, eventually contributing to the collapse of their reign. Yeah, that's what happens when your family, each other. So something's gonna get weird down the road. Jaw's gonna get a little bit messy, alright? That's science. Number 4, the Forzas. The Forzas were a military family who gained control of Milan through sheer force and cunning alliances. They became the city's rulers, but their grip on power was, of course, never secure, as are any of the grips in this list. Top 10 grips. Betrayals, warfare, and constant power struggles defined their rule, with enemies always plotting to bring them down. There's always those shifty fellows in the bushes looking up at you, plotting. Their reign ended in turmoil, weakened by internal conflicts and rivalries. The Forzas were doomed by their reliance on brutal methods, and they also could have maintained control had they focused on more diplomatic solutions. So, I don't know, maybe a little less violence, a little more talky-talky. Might save a few things. Number 3, the Rothschilds. The Rothschild family is one of the most influential banking dynasties in Europe, amassing extraordinary wealth and power. These guys were rich, okay? When you're rich, you can do pretty much anything you want, depending on the time period. Their financial prowess was unmatched, but with great power came great rumors and conspiracy theories. Many speculated that the Rothschilds were secretly controlling world events from the shadows, like, Illuminati style, right? Someone's gonna pause that right there and I'm gonna get canceled. However, despite their whispers, their legacy in banking and philanthropy remains strong, so we haven't cracked it just yet. Are the stories about their hidden power based on reality, or are they just the product of envy and suspicion? I'm gonna say a little bit of both. Number 2, the Kennedys. The Kennedys are often referred to as America's royal family, right? But their story is filled with both triumph and tragedy. From John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy to the many personal misfortunes that the families faced, their legacy is often overshadowed by the so-called Kennedy curse. Now, despite this, the family's influence in politics and culture remains undeniable. Is the Kennedy curse real, or is this just a series of unfortunate events that we've looked too hard into? I mean, who was that guy with the umbrella, right? Did you ever crack that? Who was that man? You don't need an umbrella, it's a sunny day. And finally, number 1, the Bonapartes. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise from a military general to emperor of France was honestly the stuff of legends. Great movie also, Joaquin Phoenix, so good. After crowning himself emperor in 1804, Napoleon expanded his empire, placing his family members in position of power across Europe. However, his ambition was his undoing. They would call him like the little king or something, or like little man or something. I mean, would you really want to piss a guy off like this? No, okay? Following a series of military defeats, most notably at the Battle of Waterloo, his empire eventually crumbled and the Bonaparte family's influence never fully recovered. Napoleon's unquenchable thirst for power eventually led to his downfall, and his empire was always destined to collapse under its own weight. It was just a matter of when. Stop calling him like a short king or something. Like, it's Napoleon Bonaparte, and people online will still be like, he was short. It's like, he was Napoleon Bonaparte. Are you kidding? Can't win.
This dynasty began in 1952 when brothers Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond purchased a small pharmaceutical company and became pioneers of medical marketing. A generation later, that company became known as Purdue Pharma. In 1995, under the leadership of Raymond's son Richard, Purdue introduced the United States to its medical miracle, the magic capsule that could melt pain away and give people back their lives. Overdoses have killed over 1 million people in the US since 1999, and this family, dubbed America's most evil family, is directly responsible for a significant portion of those. You gotta ask, how could an entire pharmaceutical company not realize that they were selling candy-coated addictions? Or rather, how much profit made it acceptable to turn a blind eye to the fact? Everybody involved were rolling in cash at the expense of millions of lives. Over the span of the company's existence, Purdue earned $31 billion in revenue, with the majority of that wealth going right into the pockets of the family, whom Forbes magazine listed as one of the 20 most wealthy families in the US back in 2016. The US government first began looking into the company in the early 2000s, and after a series of negotiations, the first major penalty for the company came in May of 2007, and in October 2020, the company reached an $8.3 billion settlement with the US Justice Department. So the family, the Sackler family, as part of the settlement, would only have to cough up $225 million of their personal wealth, which is less than 2.5% of the total amount of money they withdrew from Purdue solely during the peak of the crisis from 2008 to 2017. They were also allowed to continue to admit no wrongdoing or face any criminal charges. The Baresi Brothers were an Italian-American group headed by 4 brothers and several other associates. They lasted from the 1980s to 1999, when Lorenzo became a capo in the Soprano crime family, and the other brothers joined him. They acted mostly as a group for hire for bigger groups, but they did control their own territory, earning them a spot on today's list. The Buffalo crime family flourished from 1922 until 1969 under the leadership of Stefano Magaddino. At the time, the Buffalo organized crime scene needed new leadership, and this crime family was found in 1912 by Joseph DiCarlo and Angelo, as boss and underboss respectively. DiCarlo ran the Buffalo family until he passed in 1922, and then Magaddino took over. Upon his arrival, Magaddino began to build an empire in Western New York. Magaddino was one of the founding members of the Commission, by the way, the overarching organization that linked all these syndicates together that began in the 1930s. Kind of a huge deal. The Har Brothers, Micah and Wiley, terrorized settlers in the remote mountains immediately after the American Revolution. They had stayed loyal to the British Crown during the struggle and may have decided that they had better move west after the American victory. They survived by robbing and killing settlers who were beginning to cultivate the area and appeared to have thoroughly enjoyed the killing part. Well, thankfully, it wasn't long before vigilantes were like, hey, let's do something about this. Micah died of his wounds when a posse caught up with them in 1799. Wiley escaped, but the authorities captured and took care of him in 1804. It was 1998, and the New York City tabloids were buzzing with the news of Irene Silverman. The wealthy widow, a former Radio City Music Hall rockette, had gone missing. Well, let's see, who do we got? Sante Quimes and her son Kenneth were secretly sharing a bed on the first floor of the 82-year-old's $10 million townhouse, which she ran as a boarding home. Now, Silverman had always been wary of Kenneth, particularly. According to news outlets, the 23-year-old changed the locks and refused to let anybody in. He didn't socialize, he paid his rent in cash. Whenever he entered or left the building, he would shield his face from security cameras. Well, the beloved redhead, who was last seen on July 5th, seemingly vanished after saying that she wanted to evict him. And at the time of her disappearance, Kenneth was using the alias Menny Gurin. Well, investigators obtained a search warrant to enter his apartment and found the bed was stripped, there was black trash bags, duct tape. You can put 2 and 2 together and make 4. Experts say the answer was simple: greed. The possibility of tricking an elderly woman out of her lavish Manhattan home and getting away with it was too good to pass up. The Columbo crime family is the youngest of the 5 families that dominate organized crime in New York City. They trace their roots back to a bootlegging group formed by Joseph Profaci in 1928. This family has been torn apart by at least 3 internal wars, the first one taking place in the late 1950s when Capo Joe Gallo revolted against Profaci, and the family was not reunited until the early 1960s under Joseph Columbo. In 1971, the second family hell began after Gallo's release from prison and the firing of Columbo, and Columbo supporters led by Carmine Persico won the Second War after the exiling of the Gallo crew to the Genovese family in 1975. Flash forward 1991, the third and worst event of all erupted when acting boss Victor Orena tried to seize power from the imprisoned Carmine. The family split into factions loyal to Orena and Persico, and 2 years of mayhem continued. It ended in 1993 with 12 family members dead, Orena imprisoned, leaving Persico the winner more or less by default. In the 2000s, the family was further crippled by multiple convictions in federal racketeering cases and numerous members becoming government witnesses. A lot of folks think this is the weakest family. The Gambino crime family, another one of the big five. They went through 5 bosses between 1910 and 1957 and are named after Carlo Gambino, boss of the family at the time of the McClellan hearings in 1963, when the structure of organized crime first gained public attention. I believe their most prominent member was underboss Albert Anastasia, who rose to infamy as the operating head of the underworld's enforcement arm. The rise of what was probably the most powerful crime family in America for a time began in 1957, when Anastasia was killed while sitting in a barber chair at the Park Sheridan Hotel in Manhattan. Experts believe that Anastasia's underboss, Carlo Gambino, helped orchestrate the hit to take over the family. Gambino then partnered with Meyer Lansky to control gambling interests in Cuba. The family's fortunes grew through 1976, when Gambino appointed his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, as boss upon his death. Now, Castellano infuriated upstart capo John Gotti, who orchestrated Castellano's killing in 1985. Gotti's downfall came in 1992 when his underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, cooperated with the FBI. This cooperation brought down Gotti, along with most of the top members of the Gambino family. And the Luchese family is the last of the big five that we're going to talk about today. They started in the 1920s and were taken over by Tommy Gagliano during the Castellamarese War and led by him until he passed in 1951. Known as the Gagliano crime family under Gagliano, the family kept their activities low-key. Their efforts were concentrated in the Bronx, Manhattan, and New Jersey. Now enter Tommy Luchese, who had served as Gagliano's underboss for 20 years, and he led the family to become one of the most powerful families to sit on the commission. Luchese teamed up with Gambino's boss to control organized crime in New York, because Luchese had a stronghold on the garment industry and took control of many crime rackets for the family. Fun fact though, for most of its history, this family was one of the most peaceful ones in the nation. Granted, that all changed when Corallo named Victor Amuso his successor shortly before going to prison, and Amuso promoted one of his closest allies, Anthony Casso, to underboss. Starting in 1986, Amuso and Casso instituted one of the deadliest reigns in crime history, ordering virtually anybody who crossed them to be killed. It is estimated that Casso himself killed between 30 to 40 people and ordered over 100 additional deaths during his reign. He was sentenced to hundreds of years in prison. By the way, he also had authority over some New York police detectives who carried out crimes for him. Kinda scary. Amuso was arrested in 1991, sentenced to life in prison, and several Luchese family members, fearing for their lives, turned informant. The highest profile of all of these was acting boss Alphonse Darco, who became the first boss of a New York crime family to testify against organized crime. This led to arrests of the entire family hierarchy, with Casso also becoming an informant. Testimony from these informants pretty much destroyed the family. There was a lot of them thrown in jail. The servant selling trade was all Isaac Franklin ever knew. Right around the time the United States passed a law barring transatlantic trade, Franklin and his older brothers grew interested in the domestic version. They began transporting small numbers of people between Virginia and the Deep South. Franklin worked with a few partners over the years, but connected with his longest-lasting collaborator, the man who became his closest friend, confidant, and nephew by marriage in the early 1820s. So at the time, John Armfield was lacking in purpose. He had been chased away from a county in North Carolina for fathering a descendant out of wedlock. And he didn't know what to do, but he knew what he did not want to do. He didn't want to farm. So floundering about, he was like, hey, I'll just dabble in this trade. Franklin and Armfield met a few years after that in the course of business and immediately developed a rapport. And this was an intimacy that continued for decades and fueled their profitability. And yeah, they became family. The Lincoln crime family was formed by Lincoln Clay in 1968 as a result of his desire for revenge against Sal Marcano and the Marcano crime family for killing his family. So throughout the summer and fall of 1968, Lincoln waged his vengeance on Sal's operations, dismantling them one by one and putting his own people in their place. Afterwards, Lincoln met with Leo Galante, who came to New Bordeaux on behalf of the Commission. After Lincoln assured Leo that he had no quarrel with them, the two came to an agreement. Lincoln can have New Bordeaux and run it any way he pleases, as long as he kicks up 20% to the commission once a month. The family runs various rackets in all 9 districts of New Bordeaux, covering everything. We got auto theft, waste disposal, growing stuff,